Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Salli wa sallam ala Muhammad ibn Abdullah alayhi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Hello everybody. This is our fourth lecture in research methodology. This lecture is very critical one. It's very critical. Why? Because we are going to talk about literature review. How and why we conduct literature review. Before how, why do we conduct literature review? Why? Why do I need to conduct literature review? Maybe because my supervisor wants me to do that. Maybe because it's a requirement for a PhD. Maybe because all of the people in the academia do that, so I have to imitate them. So why? Why do I need to do that? What is the rationale for that? Before I start talking about why do I need to have a literature review, I need to understand something very important, which is, what is the difference between professional research and academic research? What's the difference? Sometimes professional research is conducted by a professional guy who works in the industry for 20 years. He have a lot of information, a lot of wisdom. So why academia is different? Does it mean professional is bad or academia is good? Or academia is good and professional is bad? No, I don't say that. But there are a big difference between academic paper and professional paper. Professional paper, someone who have a good insights, maybe collected very useful information by somehow, but he doesn't need to show what is the contribution to knowledge. He doesn't need to tell people where this research in the literature. However, in academic research, we must tell people where is our research in the body of the knowledge. So we need first to illustrate what is the knowledge, what is literature, what others did. Then we found a gap. We call it a knowledge gap, and we use it as a research question later to be answered. So we said that before, any PhD journey is about research question. No one has answered this research question before. Then a way to answer this research question, then the answer of research question. So 3 steps. Research question hasn't been answered before, the way to answer it, and the answer. Research question based on the knowledge gap, research methodology, and findings and analysis. This is the PhD journey. So if you have a problem in your knowledge gap, you failed. Psst, finished. Because everything after that, rubbish. Doesn't make a sense. So this is very critical. Second, methodology. If you have a problem in methodology, you can take major correction. But if your research question is good enough, knowledge gap, address a very nice knowledge gap, useful knowledge gap, and your methodology is good, but your analysis has a problem, you can have a minor correction. Take care. Fail, major correction, minor correction. That's why literature review is very, very important. So the first reason for why do we conduct a literature review is identify knowledge gap, finding knowledge gap. So the first thing is knowledge gap. You must find knowledge gap. How can we find a knowledge gap? In order to find a knowledge gap, you need to convince people that there is a knowledge gap. To be honest with you, nothing is called knowledge gap, because there are millions of papers published each year. It's impossible to find a clear knowledge gap. However, you have to show people that there is a knowledge gap. You have to be smart enough to do that. It's an art. How come? How can I show people there is a knowledge gap? I have to tell people, for example, I need to say, we know X, we know Y, we do not know what's the difference between X and Y. What's in this area? So I need first to tell people there is a board in Cranfield University. And this board in the Cranfield University have letters. And we have two letters. These letters are not the same. This X is different from Y and Y is different from X. However, we do not know what's in it. What's between them. So we need to tell people from very abroad, then narrow, then the point of knowledge gap. I will devote a lecture for how can we find out the knowledge gap. But in order to find out knowledge gap, you need to have literature review written in a specific way to convince people that there is a knowledge gap. Knowledge gap is not too big, because if I see very big knowledge gap, it means that it's not knowledge gap. You haven't researched it enough. So we will talk about the criteria of knowledge gap in the next lecture, bismillah. So the first reason for writing literature review is convincing people that I am able to find a knowledge gap. Look, convincing people that I am able to find knowledge gap, and to convince people that there is a knowledge gap. Second reason for literature review is defining concepts. Any concept in your research question, in your research aim, in your research objectives should be defined, should be clearly identified. When you say, for example, peace, what is the meaning of peace? If you talk about love, what do you mean? Which concept? We have millions of definitions of love, dozens of definitions of love. So which concept you adopt, which concept you do not adopt? Why you don't adopt this? Why do you adopt this? Why do you create a new concept? So you must fulfill this requirement. So first, you must show knowledge gap. If you do not do that, you failed in your PhD. That's it, finished. So if you are successful to do that, the second is defining concept. I want to tell you something in your nose, in your ear, sorry. Your examiner doesn't have sufficient time to read your thesis, which means he will not be able to read all what you do, which means he looks at a certain point in your research. So if he finds these points easily, you will succeed. Simply, he wants you to succeed. He just wants to find. There is a text called originality. Originality means knowledge gap. If he is able to find knowledge gap easily, you succeed. If he confused where is the knowledge gap, you don't convince me, I'm not convinced enough, failed. The same here. He tries to read your research question, and after that he identified 5-6 concepts. This concept, love. I don't understand. What do you mean love? Which kind of love you are talking about? What's the attributes of love? How do you specify the word love? So he searches in your literature review, concept love. He searches for what? For your definition. Which definition you adopt or you create in your research. So please make it easy for him. Additionally, you can here talk about general things about the concepts and this kind of stuff. I will devote the third lecture about this one. But you must fulfill this requirement. The third, which is theoretical framework. We talked about it before. What's the theoretical framework? Of course, if you are interpretive, what does it mean? Interpretive research, you do not have hypothesis. You start to explore, to investigate, to understand. If you are positive research, so you have interpretive and positive. If you have positive research, you have hypothesis and you test your hypothesis using empirical data. So this is called theoretical framework. What's theoretical framework? Set of hypotheses haven't been tested. Once you test them, we call it model. So this is theoretical framework. How to develop your theoretical framework? How do you develop your hypothesis? I need to mention something very important. This is hypothesis. X affects Y. Y affects Z. So this is, we call it theoretical framework. A set of hypotheses. X is hypothesized to affect Y. The second hypothesis, Y affects Z. So this is two hypotheses, we have theoretical framework. According to positive research, we say that before, according to positive research, science is two things, rationalism plus empiricism. Rationalism, it means that your relationship, your hypotheses are developed based on literature review. So, for example, Ahmed says, Amgad loves red color. Muhammad says, this pen is red. Therefore, based on the two arguments, therefore Amgad loves this pen. So it's based on, this is hypothesis developed mainly from literature. I deduce this relationship from literature review. Okay, I conclude, I extrapolate this from literature review. I will talk about it in the fourth lecture in literature review. So there are three main aims: knowledge gap, defining concepts, and theoretical framework. Knowledge gap, the aim is just to convince people that I am able to find the knowledge gap, and I convince you that there is a knowledge gap. Defining concept, illustrating different concepts and criticizing all of them to pick just one to be used in my research, or criticize all of them and I develop my own concept. And of course I'll say why. The third one is developing my theoretical framework mainly from literature review by deducing and understanding using what people did in order to formulate my hypothesis based on the rationale, the theory, the philosophy, the idea, okay? Not based on empirical evidence, but based on rational evidence. So this is our aim of literature review. Thank you very much. I don't want to make one lecture more than 10 minutes. So the next lecture, it will be about knowledge. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك